High on a hill overlooking the Missouri River stands an old fort where you can relive part of the pioneer life in the mid-American wilderness. It is no accident that the fort is on the river. For most of the history of our country, the rivers have been her lifeblood, arteries of transportation and shipping. The earliest explorers followed the river. Before 1800, most of the area west of the Mississippi was wilderness, inhabited only by wildlife and Native American Indians, and traversed only by the boldest of fur trappers and explorers. The midsection of the continent did not belong to the fledgling United States of America. It had been claimed by both the Spanish and the French. France owned these lands in 1803, when they became part of America under the Louisiana Purchase. The territory was virtually unexplored. In 1804, Meriwether Lewis and William Clark explored this portion of the Missouri River, populated by Indians of the Osage, Missouri, Kansas, Iowa, and such tribes. In 1808, Captain Clark returned to build a trading post and army post at what was first called Fort Clark and would later be called Fort Osage. The fort would have two purposes. It was part of the national defense, a protection for the new territory against foreign attack from the French and British. And second, there would be a trading post to encourage friendly relations between settlers and Indians and between area tribes. The area was heavily forested, and there were few tools available. So virtually all the buildings in this part of the frontier would be of log construction. The logs were rough cut to shape by hand, notched at the ends, locking together like today's toy log construction sets. The cracks between them had to be filled to keep out rain and winter chill. The spaces were filled with mud, pieces of wood, lengths of rope, whatever was available. Even the rain guttering and downspouts were made of wood. From here on the land side of the fort, what is visible is mostly stockade fence and guard towers. As we enter the massive log stockade gates, we begin to see that a sort of town or community existed here. But it was, first of all, a community within a fort. During the War of 1812, about 80 regular Army soldiers were stationed here to guard this outpost on the frontier. Citizen militiamen also gathered here to train and drill. As shown in this reenactment, these early soldiers bore little resemblance to a modern precision drill team. And though they may seem disorganized by today's standards, they very seriously practiced their military skills, including musket drills. The smoke of black powder often formed clouds above the hills and meadows surrounding the fort. They also learned the combat skills of the natives of the area, such as throwing a tomahawk. After their hard work, they would line up like soldiers of today for their meal. Today's fare includes stew containing squirrel meat and venison, though there are jokes about a pack animal being missing. Such a stew was said to be tasty, though it might not have looked very appealing. These lookout towers, or blockhouses, were for guard duty, storage, and defense. The two-story log towers provided a good field of view, particularly on the river side of the fort. As you can see, the towers were also equipped with cannon. If the lookout saw an attack coming, the towers would be filled with soldiers who could fire their muskets through these small openings while being protected by sturdy log walls, which were likely to stop most bullets fired in those days, but were vulnerable to cannon projectiles and, of course, to fire. It was important to not let any enemy get close enough to burn the fort. Besides danger, the frontier soldiers who occupied these barracks had to endure a life with few comforts and dull routine. Typically, 20 soldiers were quartered in each of these rooms, 4 of them taking turns sleeping in each bed. The floors were dirt, and of course light had to come from candles or oil lamps. With few windows, no fans or air conditioning, it was sweltering hot on a summer night. The only heat in the winter came from a fireplace. The room was very chilly, and there was a fire to be tended all night. Furniture was sparse and roughly made. For recreation, there might be a handmade checkerboard. For the most part, these rooms were filled with wooden bunks. A lumpy mattress supported by ropes, a dirt floor, and a small, dimly lit room shared with 19 other people. That is about all an enlisted man in the Army of the Republic had to look forward to on the frontier. The military commander of the fort had private living quarters in the compound where he could experience more of the comforts of home befitting an officer and a gentleman. Also in the compound was the post blacksmith's shop, where the smith forged out and repaired tools and other articles made of metal. The store and factory at the fort was for trading with the area Indians. Part of the mission of the fort was to provide luxuries for the Indians in exchange for hides and pelts. From the landward side, the factory looked like a large log cabin. From the riverside, it is apparent that it was a remarkable 4-story building. The foundation and lower floor walls were built of native Missouri limestone rock. The upper levels were a log house. This building was the key to the financial success of the fort and served many purposes. On this side, boats landed. Some were Indian canoes, such as these, and some were boats carrying supplies and goods for trading brought up the Missouri River from St. Louis. The boats returned loaded with furs taken in trade from the Indians. Up the hill from the area where the boats landed was the door to the lowest level of the trading post. This level could be used as a cargo warehouse for incoming and outgoing items of trade and supply. On the second level, factory activities were carried out. Hides procured from Indians and early trappers in return for merchandise were tanned, stretched, and prepared for shipment. Beaver fur to make felt for hats, fox, rabbit, and raccoon for coats and linings, bear fur for rugs. This level also contained the kitchen area. It is interesting to see how different a kitchen was in those days. This was the stove, a wood-burning fireplace. The oven, set in the fireplace brick, was heated by the adjacent fire. This roaster oven, invented by Benjamin Franklin, reflected the heat to brown a turkey on all sides. In pioneer days, even cooking was vastly different from today. In a Dutch oven, the pioneer cooks prepared dishes like these: beaten biscuits. Tea was a popular beverage, but it didn't come in tea bags or instant tea. It was shipped pressed into blocks like this, hard as a brick. On the other hand, some things haven't changed much since pioneer days, though today we seldom have muskets close by the table for protection. From the ground up on this side, the factory was partly living quarters for the post manager, called the factor. The other part was the trading post, which here was operated by the United States government. The post factor, George Sibley, occupied these rooms. Here on the first floor was a combination living room and dining room. Protected by the stockade walls and unlike the military portion of the fort, this building has windows with real glass panes, shipped in from St. Louis. Notice how wavy things look through these windows. In the early 1800s, window panes were poured, not extruded or rolled and sometimes polished as they are today. Here, in one part of the top floor, was Sibley's bedroom and study. An executive, he had at least one servant. Here, except for rough-hewn walls, the factor, the leader of the fort, could retreat to a residence furnished like those in civilization, back in St. Louis or further east. This is the first-floor trading post store. Here, Indians traded their furs for things they could not produce themselves, such as tools, cloth, buttons, trinkets, firearms, powder and shot, utensils, and other manufactured goods. Here on the top floor, in addition to the factor's bedroom, there was a storeroom where the inventory of items for trade was kept. At the fort's peak of activity, the storeroom contained merchandise that would cost over $250,000 today. Life in those times was hard. Even though there was fireplace heat, the winters were cold and the rooms were drafty. Even in winter, the soldiers had to stand guard, drill, and work. Transportation was by horse, mule, wagon, or foot. There were no heated cars or buses. The only solution to the cold was bundle up and endure the chill. Even when the weather was pleasant, there was always work to be done in the small community that sprang up within and around the walls of the fort. The power of hand and foot produced yarn, spun on a spinning wheel from the wool of sheep, so that blankets and other woolen items could be woven. Homemade dyes, like this for cloth, were made by boiling the brown stain from walnuts. Cloth was then simmered in the dye, which would give it a long-lasting color. There were meals to cook for trappers, traders, soldiers, and settlers. There were always fires to be tended and kindling to be made. Even the children had their part in the work to keep the fort and the community alive. If there was to be soap for washing, it too had to be made by cooking fat and ashes, again over an open fire. There was a store and a storekeeper, but the merchandise offered was not much different from that which was sold to the Osage at the trading post. Many of the fort's inhabitants must have been homesick and longing for the true comforts of civilization. But for a time, this was civilization on the frontier. This and the civilization of the Native Americans, or Indians. The fort was always intended to make a profit for the government, and it did. But as the area was settled and concerns about Indian attacks and foreign invasion lessened, private traders pressed to close the trading post and end the government's competition with them. When there was no more need for a frontier military outpost, the fort was abandoned, replaced by more modern military installations. Fort Osage and other places like it faded from existence, while life bustled and thrived in new nearby towns. One such town was named Sibley, Missouri, after the commander of the fort.